Welcome to Australian Hiker, your online hiking resource. We're your hosts, Tim and Jill Savage.
This is episode 128 of the Australian Hiker podcast. And in this week's episode, we're going to be doing our second media review for the year. And we're going to be discussing 3 books and 3 movies that are all hiking related. And as we start leading up towards Christmas, definitely worthwhile thinking about. We hope you enjoy.
First movie we're going to have a look at is a movie called The Way, and it stars Martin Sheen, and the director of the movie is Emilio Estevez, who also happens to be Martin Sheen's son in real life, and plays Martin Sheen's son in the movie. It's about a long hike on the
Camino, or the St James Way, which is also known as.
Yeah, and hence the name of the movie, The Way. It starts off a little bit weird. Emilio Estevez starts off on the way and gets through almost one day, I think, from what I can work out, and bad weather comes in and there's an accident and he passes away. So not a great start to a very, very, very long hike, and lots of things happen, and his father decides to complete the hike on his behalf. And along the way, he meets a whole bunch of quite weird sort of characters. There's an Irishman, a writer. There's a Canadian woman who's a little bit angry about the world, and there's a Dutchman that is just kind of weird. Anyway, but it's a good movie, and, you know, it does tell a story, and I think there's an interesting thing about some of these books and movies is that, you know, people are searching for something.
I think that's the thing with a lot of the hiking books and the hiking movies, or for that matter, any books or movies that relate to real life experiences. They're all about a journey and starting off at one point, literally and figuratively, and reaching an end point where you discover yourself and solve all the woes of the world. And this movie is definitely that. Each of the characters, the main characters in the movie, has something in their life that's holding them back, or they're not living their life to their fullest, and by the end of the movie, that's all resolved. The movie was actually not based on a true story as such, but based on a series of circumstances or happenstances that the directors or the writer of the book had told, and this has been combined into a movie. So the actual events of this movie didn't actually occur as one continual story.
And I think that's reflected in the movie. There are sort of these funny little snippets of bits and pieces, and while it's a good movie and it does hang together, it probably doesn't hang together as well as I think it possibly could. But it's still a good movie.
I must admit, I wasn't expecting to like it. We'd had, after we'd done our first media review earlier this year, we asked our readers and our listeners to give us some other books or some other movies that they thought we should look at. And this one, The Way, was certainly probably the top of the list that people thought that we should come across and review. I did enjoy it. I think it was one of those movies I went into it with low expectations, but came out of it.
That's not good.
Yeah, well, I came out of it thinking this is actually not. It's a feel good movie. It's enjoyable. It's as we said, it's set on the Camino de Santiago, which starts in France and goes into Spain, roughly about 800-kilometre journey, and the This is a trip that it's a pilgrimage that was done in the Middle Ages, and people have been doing ever since that time, and certainly since the advent of hiking and serious walking, it's become a destination for a lot of people worldwide. For those people that don't know the way, or as we say, it's the Camino de Santiago or the Way of St. James, which is often referred to in English. But the Camino is one of those sort of trips where you're basically walking from town to town or village to village. And there's a number of different ways you can do this. Some people will just carry a day pack and have their main pack transported from town to town. Other people will walk with full packs. And certainly this movie was that's how it was. This movie was set up, where people were walking with their full packs and staying at the hostels each night. In most cases, there were a couple of nights where they did actually end up spending it in the wild.
Yeah, I don't think they got too much of their gear out very often, but,
No, it really did look like it was, with a couple of exceptions, they were actually staying in hostels and having their meals either in town. So it wasn't really it's not really a full-on camping trip. And I must admit, even though this is set around the Camino de Santiago, this happens to be a background to the journey that they're all going on as individuals. So it's, I must admit, the Camino, from my perspective, while I would like to do it at some stage, it's probably not high on my list. I prefer things a bit more natural, if you like. I probably will end up doing it because Jill tells me she wants to do it.
I think I might have to find someone else to do it with. I mean, this is, you don't get a lot of the scenery. You do get some of the iconic spots featured along the way, but it is very much about the relationships between particularly the four characters and I guess the challenges that they're working their way through.
So definitely worthwhile looking at, definitely worth a watch. And as I said, I didn't expect to enjoy it, but I think it's one of those movies. It's a hiking-based movie, and it's definitely worthwhile having a look at.
So the next movie we're going to look at is Into the Wild, and I think this is quite a confronting sort of movie in many ways. The story gets pieced together along the way. They're through a mechanism of flashbacks and interspersed with current situations. It's about a fellow called Christopher McCandles who, after graduating from university, decides that he's going to walk away from a materialistic life and future study, career and family wealth and basically go on the road. And he gets the idea that he's going to live in the wild of Alaska without any support and eat off the land, basically. It's got a great cast. Emile Hirsch plays Christopher, and also in the movie William Hurt and Vince Vaughn as well as Kristen Stewart. So a whole bunch of really different characters. And I think what I found interesting about this movie is that Christopher's obviously trying to find the meaning of something. He's obviously running away from a particular thing that evolves or unfolds, if you like, during the movie. It's interesting, though, that the impact that he has on the character that he meets along the way is quite profound. And so while there is some impact on him, I think the more impact is the other way around with the people that he meets and the guidance that this very young person gives to them.
I think from my perspective, this to me was, and I'll be honest here, it's probably a weird movie. I don't think I did enjoy it, but not as much as I did say the Way, which we've just talked about. And this one was actually based on a true story.
The Way is a much lighter movie.
Yeah, this one, I'll be honest, doesn't really have a happy ending in it, and it's really working almost backwards from you start off seeing where he is towards the end, and it takes you back from when he leaves school and his journey, as Jill said, through to where how he actually ends up getting to Alaska. It's quite interesting. He really does take the alternate lifestyle. He passes or hands over the remainder of his college fund, which his father wants him to go to one of the big universities, and just donates it to Oxfam. He ends up having his car wrecked in a flash flood, and he ends up just burning his money that he had and just wandering off and living
literally burning his money.
And just living as he can. He does work where he can, and he shuns the materialistic life.
Well, I think the other thing is that he completely disappears from the family perspective. They can't find him. It's almost 2 years by the time they do, and it really is turning his back on the whole connection, I guess. I really felt sorry for his sister. He has a younger sister who he seemed to be close to, and she wasn't aware of what he was planning to do and the journey that he was planning to go on. But, with a troubled family life, and to leave her as a young woman, I guess a teenager, dealing with the family life. I think that was a bit unfair, but I'm not sure he was thinking too much about other people.
So he, as you said, he ends up pretty much traveling around the USA, the continental USA. He ends up down in Mexico. He manages to end up in Mexico by canoe, and
manages to cross the border without any papers, which back into the US.
He tries to actually cross back in the legal way, and when he gets told, well, you haven't got a passport or any proof of identification because he's burned it all at this stage or destroyed it all, he ends up sneaking back into the country in quite a unique way.
And we should say that this is 1990, 1991 and into 1992. So it's probably a slightly different world, in the US, given what happened later on in the US in terms of border issues and terrorism and so on.
So, I mean, as I said, overall, he ends up in Alaska, and I think we won't be really giving away too much here. He does end up dying at the end of the movie.
Oh, I didn't say that in the review.
And
it is a true story, so you could probably Google it and find that out.
And it's interesting when you actually read, you look at the movie and think, okay, this is what happened, and then go on the internet and look at in more detail about the things he did and the things he shouldn't have done, and they actually discovered that he ended up being trapped where he was because of a swollen river and couldn't get across it. But had he have had a map, he would have realised that a crossing over the river was available less than a mile from where he was.
And he did get a lot of criticism about being unprepared and not having the right gear, and as Tim was saying, didn't even go into the Alaskan wilderness with a map.
So, as I said, overall, I did enjoy it. It is a strange movie. It's got a lot of Kristen Stewart, Vince Vaughn, both fairly young in these ones. I think I don't think I've ever seen Vince Vaughn as young as I have in this movie. It's not the sort of thing I wouldn't say it's a feel good movie
No, it isn't. No, it isn't. But there are some aspects of that, and I think there were some really entertaining one-liners in this movie that you just need to watch out for. And if you do get the DVD, you'll have to rewind and play them again because they're quite entertaining.
Okay, so that takes us on to the third of our movies to review, and that's Tracks. Now, Tracks as a movie is based on a true story. It's the story of Robin Davidson as she basically goes from Alice Springs through to the west coast of Australia, and this was a trip of roughly 1,700 miles, and you'll have to forgive me. Can't do the conversion on kilometres here, but that's a pretty long trip. And,
Yeah.
and this was done in the days where this was pre-internet. This was in the 70s. This was pre-internet. Really, the only news we had was the newspapers and the television, and that was about it. And I'm old enough to remember this trip happening and being reported in the news, and it really was seen as a huge deal. Now people do all sorts of weird and wonderful things from an adventure perspective. But the movie is based around where she decides that this is what she's going to do. She's going to do this great walk, and she's going to end up getting some camels to act as pack animals and take her on this journey. And it starts off with her actually in Alice Springs, arriving in Alice Springs, and a lot of the movie is spent talking about or going through and explaining how she gets a job, how she gets the camels, how she gets all the equipment that she needs. And it's, I think from my perspective, it's, you look at Alice Springs or the images of Alice Springs in what it would look like in those days, it was pretty much non-existent as a town, nothing compared to what it was now. So it was very much a remote outback town that people tended not to go to as such.
Yeah, for me, this movie doesn't really convey, I guess, the challenges of being a woman in outback Australia in the 70s. I think the challenges of being a woman in Australia anywhere in the 70s was probably, a reasonable challenge. But this environment, I think it kind of plays down some of this stuff. There are snippets of it, but I did expect it to be a bit grittier than what it was, and much harsher than watching the movie. I didn't read the book, so I'm not quite sure what happened in the book, but I just got a sense that it was a bit sanitized. And also, when she does get to the West Coast, so it's a true story, so we know what happened. You're left with all these questions about, well, what now and how come and, what happens from here?
So, as Jill said, it was a bit sanitised in some respect. The attitude towards women at that time, particularly in very remote areas of Australia, were quite abysmal compared to what they are these days. The attitude towards the Aboriginal people was even worse. And there's a couple of examples in the movie where it's one Aboriginal woman in particular was treated really badly because she tried to come into the wrong area of a pub, and then the way that Westerners view Indigenous culture and how we tend not to think about how their social norms differ from ours and just expect that if we want to do something like take their photos without asking, that's acceptable. I think these days in particular, you don't take anyone's photos without asking first. But at that stage, it was just seen as, okay, well, that's fine. We'll just do it. We don't need to ask. The trip itself, as I said, I can remember this being reported in the newspapers at the time, and there were some quite interesting stories. And as it turned out, there were things that we're going to talk about the book in a minute. There was a lot of detail missing from this movie that is present in the book. So the movie does provide a good overview of what's going on, of her trip, of how she got there, and and the challenges she's faced as she went. But as I said, there was a lot of smaller detail missing. Because I'd remembered reading about this and hearing about this that I wanted to know. But as a movie to watch, it's a good movie. It does showcase the older or the Australian culture from the 1970s. And again, it's one of those movies. It's an iconic movie, and it really, probably for most Australians, if you think back to the last time someone did this sort of trip, the last time anyone really did stuff like this was, the explorers, in the 1800s. No one seemed to just go wandering off into the middle of nowhere. and
with a bunch of camels.
With a bunch of camels and just do this type of adventure. Yeah. So well worth watching.
Yeah, and I think, it's an Australian-made movie, so straight out, it's an Australian-made movie, so, a shout-out to Australian expertise in putting a great movie together.
Okay, so that leads us on to the first of our books we're going to talk about. We've got 3 books. And again, the book we're going to look at first up is The Tracks. So it's the book version of the movie we've just gone through and discussed. For me, I hadn't actually planned on reviewing this, but after watching the movie, I just found, as I said, there was too many details missing. I think the thing with movies is that they don't tend to describe the environment because you can see what it looks like. When they talked about the examples or talked about the poor culture in relation to women or Aboriginal people, it was done fairly shortly and sharply, and then it was like, okay, here's some examples. We're not going to talk about it anymore because we've already discussed it. And that's the issue with movies. You can only, you can't spend too much time focusing on one particular thing.
Well, it's a visual snippet and then, you move on, isn't it?
Yeah. So I came away from the movie thinking I enjoyed the movie, but I wanted more detail and more information, and that's why I ended up getting the book.
And that was pretty much some of the feedback that we did get from our followers and listeners as well. So read the book. There's a whole lot of detail and it'll fill in a lot of gaps. So bit of a change of pace now. The next book that we're going to look at is 50 Places to Hike Before You Die. And this is in a series of 50 places to ... And I think there's diving and there's, 50 places to play golf and a whole bunch of others. And it's by a fellow called Chris Santella, who's done about 6 or 7 of these particular books. It's a hardcover. It's a smallish sort of book. I'm not quite sure what size that is, but it's quite a good book in terms of the stories or the narrative that it has around these 50 hikes. It covers hikes worldwide. Mostly, I'd say for this one, the iconic kind of hikes that you're probably and trails that you're probably familiar with. It isn't a guide of how to, so it's more a snippet and an inspirational kind of book. It does have some information about if you go, but it's very, very, very high level. That said, it's quite a nice book. There's some really great images in it, and probably about 3 or 4 pages dedicated to each of the hikes that it talks about.
Okay, so from your perspective, is it a bit of a coffee table book? Is it a bit of an inspirational book? What would you say it's aimed at?
I think it's probably an inspirational book. You can pick it up and put it down and just jump into the middle and see where you're at. As a coffee table book, it's probably not quite big enough for a coffee table book. You need something a little bit more substantial in size. But it is a nice book to have sitting around to be able to leaf through whenever you get the urge.
Okay, so what's our last book to review is?
So the last one is another review of hikes across the world, and it's called Epic Hikes of the World, and it's a Lonely Planet book. And this is probably the kind of size that you would want for a coffee table book. It does have 50 hikes that it reviews, coincidentally a different bunch, or there's a little bit of overlap to the previous book but not too much, and some really, I guess, more unusual hikes along the way. The thing I also like about this one is that it's got urban hikes and historic trails as well as natural trails. And for each of the reviews, there are 3 additional snippets of hikes which are similar to the ones that have been reviewed. So if you like the one that was reviewed, it says more like this, and there are another 3. So there's kind of 150 snippets plus the 50 hikes that get reviewed in a reasonable amount of detail, a little bit more than the previous book.
So the snippets are not as in depth as the main reviews, or
no, they're just a few paragraphs. So as I open it up, there's a section on the volcano hike in Nicaragua, and the more like this is volcano hikes, and there's the Vesuvius crater in Italy, there's the ascent in Argentina, and there's another one in Yellowstone National Park. But it's, probably, I don't know, a couple of paragraphs on each of those, a little bit of a snippet. Great images in this book. It is a bigger book, and as I said, it could be a coffee table book, but it just has this really weird cover on it that does nothing for me.
No, and I think you said in the written review of this, it did look like a bit like a children's book, and it does. But I mean, in some respects, that's not a bad thing. It stands out. It's it's not this book with this glorious front image on the front cover. Like
give me the glorious image anytime. I just it was quite disappointing. And when I got to review it, I thought, oh, this is going to be interesting. The images inside are so different to the cover. They use that kind of stylized imagery as a section break, but other than that, the photography is just stunning. And I didn't say, but it as a Lonely Planet book, it is written by the writers of the Lonely Planet guidebook. So all of the sort of prominent writers in those series of books have contributed to this book, and there's this huge list of people at the end who write regularly for Lonely Planet guidebooks.
So how would you compare the two of them? If you were going to only buy one, is there one better way, or are they both they're different enough that they're both worthwhile looking at?
I think 50 Places to Hike Before You Die is a better looking book. So, that'd be nice to have on the shelf or even on the coffee table. I think The Epic Hikes of the World by Lonely Planet is a little bit more of a book you might use to start your research, to sort of fine-tune which ones you want to focus on for your bucket list rather than necessarily just leaf through.
So that was our review for the second half of this year, and we'll be doing a review of this type on an annual basis. This year we ended up doing two because we had a bit of a backlog. So, and our aim is certainly to go through and review sort of one book a month. Movies are a bit harder because there's only a limited number of hiking-based movies. So if you have a look at the reviews we've done in the last podcast and this one, and think of any that we've missed out, please let us know, because we're always on the lookout for things that we want to watch and that other people might be interested in as well. In next week's episode, we're going to be going through and looking at going to the toilet on the trail. This is one which I've been trying to do for a while now, and it's sort of it just keeps on getting pushed aside. And I think as people are starting to get back outside in the warmer weather. Again, experienced hikers know what they're doing and how to do things on the trail. If you've never been hiking before outdoors and need to go to the toilet, it's a bit of a learning curve. So we'll go through and provide a bit of sanitized discussion, I suppose, on how to go to the toilet on the trail and what to look for.
Yeah, maybe a few hacks on how to make it a more pleasant and streamlined experience than anything else.
As always, you can listen to this podcast through our website at www.australianhiker.com.au, through Apple Podcasts, through Stitcher, through SoundCloud, and any other number of podcatchers that you listen to your podcasts through. Just a bit of a pre-warning here. We're coming up to our third birthday in November. So that's only,
I feel older than 3,
yeah,
but
it's only around about 3.5 weeks away. And we will, as we have done the last couple of years, be running some competitions to give you a chance to win some gear, as well as going through and providing some discount codes on some of the product and store that'll help if you are looking at some gear, particularly as we're leading up towards Christmas. Might be a bit of a help in reducing the costs that you're looking at. So go through to our Facebook page or go through to our website and sign up to our newsletter just to get a bit of pre-warning about what's happening there. That's all for me. Bye for now.
and bye from me.